Welcome to episode 10 of the Helpful Huddle podcast, where we interview Michael Caligiuri on the different subjects surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Michael is finishing his PhD at Penn State, and the focus of his research is in the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. What I want you to do now is turn up your volume, kick back, relax, and enjoy this episode. Welcome back to the Helpful Huddle podcast. I am your host, Luke Pierce, and I'm sitting here with a really good friend of mine, Michael. I actually only know you by your first name. I have no idea how to say your last name, but say hi to the people and tell us how to say your last name.
Hello, everyone. And my last name of being such a dear friend to Luke Pierce is Michael Caligiuri.
Caligiuri. I always say Caligiuri,
I
but
know. You're so close.
it's right there, So we've only known each other for 6 years. I've only known you as Michael.
You know what? And we've come such a long way. It used to be, hey, Mike, and now it's Michael, and now it's Michael Caligiuri. So we're going all the way.
We've got 2 names in there. Maybe a third one's coming.
The middle name is in there, but I very rarely let that out of the bag.
Well, we don't have to today in front of our tens and tens of listeners.
It's better than my one listener, so it's okay.
But Michael, I do like to start these podcasts off with a little bit of how we met
Yeah,
and then kind of diving into your story. So
sure.
please feel free to add anything onto this. But we met in New York City at Equinox. You were not a client, but a member, and I was a trainer.
Yep.
And and please forgive me if this wasn't our first conversation, but my first recollection of conversation was you telling me what train to take to get to New Jersey so that I could do a photo shoot.
I do. Yeah, because you had started, so I had been going to that Equinox probably for a few months because they just opened
Mhm.
and you just started the job.
Yeah, they opened in the fall, and I remember because it was specifically, like, the first Monday after the New Year.
Yep. So yeah, because it was convenient for me because at that point I was going to NYU, which was
Mm.
3 blocks away. I mean, the academic building that my classes were located in was right there. So it was an easy walk for me. And then I was like, all right, here's a new trainer. I am going to meet somebody new. I was trying to push my introverted self to meet new people. And then I heard Hoboken. I'm like, I know how to get there. So
And I
I'm
had
going to
no
help
idea.
everyone. So
No,
that
and you interjected and helped, which was super beneficial, and now we're still very good friends 6 years later, all because you took that step as an introvert.
I'm telling you, it is all about the chances that you take in life. I'm like, he's probably going to hate me for interrupting the conversation because you were at the front desk. And I remember I was checking in. I'm like, well, actually, I can help you because I've taken that train. So you are absolutely right. That is the first, probably the first time we spoke.
Perfect. I'm glad that I didn't completely forget. It was but it was a long time ago, so and I
It
can't
was
I honestly, for most even my best of friends, I probably can't remember the first conversation I had with them. So, you're
criminal, criminal.
call me a bad friend, but we keep up with each other.
You know what? I am never one to say that because I go, wait a minute. I know where did we meet? What did we do? And then it's usually we piece it together through
Uh,
conversation. So absolutely.
I
We
love it.
try our very best.
Yes, we do, all the time.
That's all, you know
Um,
what? That is all that you can do.
for sure. But I do wanna get started with our interview, and I
Sure.
always start off with, I wanna hear your story of how you got to where you are now, giving nothing away besides the title if someone's watching on YouTube or they clicked on the episode on for the podcast of where you're ended up. So, Mike, I'm
Sure.
giving you the floor. What's your story?
Sure. So, a real interesting story. So, I'm originally a New York State native. I have to make sure I add that little plug because
Very
I've
different.
been, yeah, it's caught up with me in the past. So, I am a New York State native from Western New York, originally born and raised in Rochester. And my career, actually, I started really a non-traditional academic and career path. I went right into industry, into the hotel industry when I was 18 years old. My first job was when I was 15 years old, working at a really, really old and outdated chain that I don't think exists anymore. They do somewhere in some spots, back at Ponderosa Steakhouse. Um, yeah, see, it's like, whoa, flash from the past. But I worked my way through in hotel management, worked for, a lot of main, large, international, global firms, and made my way from Rochester to Connecticut, where I lived just outside of New York City, near New Haven, where I was my first management job in a small town called Trumbull, Connecticut. So it's just south of New Haven, and it is in the middle of nowhere. But I worked there for about 4 years, and then I ended up moving into New York City, into Manhattan, and worked. Was given an opportunity at a four-star, four-diamond property right in Midtown Manhattan, and I became really my career kind of launched at that point from a management perspective, where I started to oversee departments, got to oversee VIP guests. I actually was able to deal with some NHL hockey teams, the NBA, when they came and stayed at our hotel in Midtown, which was really awesome. Got to sit courtside at Madison Square Garden on VIP tickets. I mean, it really some incredible experiences, and met amazing people. And then I, around that time, actually, I started my own business. There was a little thing that people now know as Airbnb, which started in New York City. But I actually started a property management company, and I started managing the Airbnb units for people who own them, who were renting them out, and I would manage the reservation systems. Meanwhile, still having my career in the hotel field. And so I became a mixed entrepreneur and hotelier. And then I switched hotel companies. In my last job, I was part of Fairmont Hotels. I was one of the managing directors that reopened. Everybody knows the Plaza Hotel in New York City, right on Central Park.
Yep.
And there were events in my life where my company was growing to a point where I needed to make a decision whether I was going to stay in corporate America or make the leap of faith and go into the entrepreneurial field full time, because I wasn't able to sustain both. And so what I did end up leaving the hotel company to pursue my entrepreneurial background. But I also, at the same time, I had never gone to college. I never had a college degree, even in undergrad at that point. And I was, I'm going to give my age away here, but I was 31 at that point, had just turned 30, going into 31. And so I made the decision. I said, you know what? Here I am. I have my own business. I'm doing really well. I want to go back to school. I want to earn my degree, because all of my friends had either bachelor's, most had master's, some had really advanced degrees. And so I applied to NYU, not knowing that everybody knows NYU, but they're like, when I eventually got accepted, I didn't realize that their acceptance rate at that point was about 12%. And
Wow.
and so I was accepted, and my friends were like, "How did you get in?" I'm like, "Doesn't everybody?" Like, I was just like, apparently not. So I went to NYU for my undergrad, and I realized fairly quickly within the first 2 years there how much I love academia, and the environment to work in the classroom and to just learn and explore and be able to challenge thoughts and be able to challenge yourself and others. And so fairly quickly, I then intended to go for my master's program. And then in my senior year of my undergrad, before I started my master's program, I said, you know what? I'm going to go all the way. I want to do my PhD. And so I did my master's with the intent in working towards applying for doctoral programs. And then I am now currently at Penn State, soon in months finishing my PhD. And so, and come this fall, I will be starting as a professor at Cal Poly. So I'm very, very excited. This has been an incredible journey through life. And Luke, you've seen me pretty much at all stages over 6 years. You've seen me in between all of that. So it's really cool to have one of my best friends who has seen me grow personally and professionally.
Yeah, and it's been a blessing seeing you grow, and even from the very beginning where I mean, I didn't know the entrepreneurial side about you. So seeing you grow from where you were to now is truly amazing and something that I do want to highlight because the podcast is obviously called the Helpful Huddle. And if you didn't know, it's all about giving the platform to people that want to help others. So I'm trying to help people, if you will.
Yeah,
And we were having a conversation off camera, or at least not recording, and you were talking about your kind of style of teaching and giving
yeah,
students the opportunity. And I'd like to bring that back up because I thought it was so powerful and is a kind of a perfect segue into
sure,
what we were about to dive into. So do you mind talking about that like we had previously?
sure. So, I everybody in life, we have different strengths, we have different experiences. And one of my main research area and what I pursue is diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. But when I teach and when I have taught in the past, what I firmly believe is a core value of mine is that we have to recognize that everybody comes from different backgrounds and everybody has different experiences. So when I'm an instructor and when I teach a course, of course I have to meet certain objectives, right? There are benchmarks of knowledge that I have to convey and I have to, get across in the classroom. But how do you achieve that? Though that's truly the question that as an instructor, I ask of myself. And so what I do is I approach a topic in multiple ways, right? How can I have this topic of, you know, let's just say sustainability, right? Of corporate social responsibility. How do I get you to understand that? Is it through, because everybody learns different, right? Some people are really good at taking exams. Some people are really good at writing papers. Some people are really good at discussing and working in groups. So at the end of the day, it's not so much about are you receiving an A, B, C, or D, and judging everybody on a unified platform, but instead giving everybody the opportunity to succeed at what they excel at. And so for my perspective, right, is my job is to help you be the best version of yourself. And how can I do that? Because everybody has the potential inside of them. My job as an academic is to create an environment that you can actually embrace and the best version of yourself can emerge. And through that, right, then that is when we actually advance as a society, as a classroom, as an organization, because you take something that you've learned, you've improved your knowledge, and that is a huge step forward. And so I think those are the steps that I take, right? And help and coach and mentor and be there, and also acknowledge that I want to learn in life, that I continually want to learn, and I learn from my students. And so it is a reciprocal relationship, right? Because everybody comes from different backgrounds, and that is awesome. That is something that is really, really powerful and really humbles me.
I love that. And I hope more professors are like you in that way of thinking. And your students are going to be very fortunate, the ones that you've already had and the ones that you will have in California as well. Um,
Thank you.
but I do want to kind of dive into your research. You were starting to talk about it a little bit, that you focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace.
Yeah,
Before we dive in to your research, I do need you to define diversity, equity, and inclusion as you see it, or at least as how we're going to talk about it.
sure. So I always what I when I give I instead of giving a straight definition, right? I don't think that's the best way to do it. I ask my students, right, what do you think DEI means? Because we always hear this term thrown around, right? We have to be more inclusive, we have to be more equitable. But what does that really mean? And I boil it down to a real world kind of analogy. And I say, we have all in our life at some point, I hope, have been invited to a party, right?
Mm.
And so the analogy that I start off with is diversity is the initial state of, if you're in college and you're printing out the pamphlets to, promote a party on Friday or Saturday night, you're distributing those flyers. You are diverse, right? You're just walking down the street or going down your dorm hall or wherever it may be in your classroom. You're handing out the pamphlets, right? Saying, the party's open to everyone. Cool. That is diversity, right? Diversity is just simply the difference in personal characteristics. That's it. So, okay, so now we got the diversity part down.
Mhm.
But equity is when you're at the dance party, right? Are you actually standing in the corner, or are people talking to you? Maybe somebody asks you to dance. And I always like to joke, I'm like, I am the last person anyone wants to dance with because I do not dance. So
I
I
feel that.
promise you, you can invite me, but I don't dance very well. So um, but we think about equity, right? So you've been invited to the party, but now when you're at the party, is somebody asking you to dance? Are you being included? Do you have a seat at that table? That is equity, right? But then the final step of that is, so somebody walks up to you and says, let's dance. But that inclusion part is separate from equity. The inclusion part is actually taking the hand of that person and dancing with them on the dance floor. So
Interesting.
it's a multi-stage process of, one, are you being invited to the party? Two, are you being asked to dance? And three, are you actually dancing with other people at the party? If all three parts are there, then we can say that is both not only diverse, but it is equitable and it is inclusive. Um,
Interesting.
and then I always add, because of late, people have put the belonging in there, the DEIB. And I think belonging is, and kind of talks and discussion with friends and colleagues and just general forum, it is kind of the outcome of DEI, right? So
Mhm.
if you are inviting everybody to the party and you're dancing with them, then people will feel like they belong, right? Whether they choose to dance or not, that is totally separate. But that cultivates a sense of belonging, which is really
Got
cool.
Got it. That's interesting. I've never heard the B added to it, but I've also never heard DEI described in that way. And I guess honestly, this is like the first conversation I've had about it outside of with my wife, who who is very passionate about it being a Latino woman.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation. And now I want to kind of dive into like your research around it. If you don't mind giving us a synopsis of what you're researching, how and
Sure.
how it applies, and we'll get into more application a little bit later, but more of like what you're researching.
Sure. So I deal with within the DEI space, there are a variety of research domains. And what I research specifically is on in what we categorize as invisible stigmatized identities. So those are personal identities that people identify with that are not obviously visibly depicted. And so that can range right from a person's sexual orientation, that can religious ideology, political ideology, socioeconomic status, education level. So those are all identities that people carry with them and within them that are not visibly depicted. Um, and so on the flip side of that, you do have visible stigmatized identities, which tend to, people are most familiar with race, gender identity. And so some of my previous work has focused on the LGBTQ plus community. So that is inclusive of sexual orientation and gender identity. So it is a broad area.
Gotcha. No, and I think that provides an excellent scope of like what you're looking at, if you will. So I guess if you don't mind, and I don't know, are you allowed to talk about your research, like
Sure.
findings and
Oh,
everything?
well, findings you have to wait until they're published.
Of
So once
course,
it's
of
published,
course.
I will absolutely come back on the podcast and talk about it.
Perfect.
Um, but I think the better way for me to frame it is
Mhm.
more of how I do my research.
That makes
And
sense.
so I do my research both in two different worlds. One is I conduct anonymous surveys, and I work in combination with companies that will, through my relationships, I can say, you know what, here's a project that I'm currently working on. I'd be really interested in, you participating, and I'll share my results with you. But, hey, would you be willing to participate? And some are, some aren't. And so what I do is I distribute the surveys and then I collect and analyze and give statistical results.
Gotcha.
Look at here's what we found on how people are emotionally attached to their organization, and here are reasons why, right? And so we frame that in using theory. We're saying here's why we believe these results will be here, and then we run it, we analyze it, and then we come up with our statistical results, and we discuss it, right? So it
Mhm.
then based on the statistical results, we say, okay, here's these bunch of numbers, but what do these numbers actually mean? And so we interpret them and make it meaningful for businesses because not many people, at least that I've encountered, love statistics. There are very few people that actually enjoy it. Um, and so for me and what I do is I go, okay, all of these numbers, right? I can talk about significance levels and confidence intervals, and no one's interested in that other
Mhm.
than publications, but they want to say, so what? What does this mean? And so I take that and translate it to the practical side. What does it mean for industry? And so
Mhm.
I bridge that from the academic perspective to industry and say, okay, based on these results, here's what it could tell us, right, about businesses and
Mhm.
operations and how people operate, how people feel within the organization. And that's part of what I do.
Gotcha. No, that's very beneficial, and I wish we could talk about results, but we'll digress to a second episode. Um,
And you and I are both football fans, so I will punt for now downfield, and
sounds
you
good.
you can run it back
Fair catch,
downfield
fair
later.
catch. Um, so I do wanna kinda back up, I guess, a little bit of, like, I assume you had a hand in choosing this area of research.
Mhm.
Why DEI? Why this? How did
Uh,
you get involved in this?
yeah. That is a great question, and thank you for asking that. So, this actually was inspired, right? So, it's actually really interesting on your podcast, on your title, right? The Helpful Huddle. It was really in kind of an internal reflection for me of, I had a great career in corporate America, and I met some amazing mentors and had some incredible bosses, but I would look at decisions that were made, right, from a corporate executive level going, this doesn't make sense. Like employees are going to be upset by this. Why is this decision or these decisions being made? And so, and especially when it came to a sense of fairness, when I originally would look and say, this isn't really right, maybe. And so I started to question inside of myself of how are these decisions being made and why are they being made the way that they are? And then
Mhm.
thinking about it, not from a research perspective, because I didn't know, right? But I saw people leave, quit, resign, however, or people not being as productive because of decisions that were being made. And I went, something's not working here. Something's not right. And so I started to do a lot of reading, just some consulting handbooks and some, Harvard review, business review books, and going, these are really interesting case studies, right? And I started to kind of self teach and self learn about, what is this terminology? What does this mean? And then I got into work and into school. And when I got into school, I started to learn some of this terminology and the theory behind it and the research that has been done for years, right? And then some of the work that has been really seminal for me dates back to the 1960s, when one of the first publications by Irving Goffman came out calling Stigma. And that's a research that was done, a book that was published, and I highly recommend it for anyone that's interested in this. Um, and it just talks about, I looked at it and went, oh my gosh, we were talking about this in 1963 is when it was first published. And we're still having the same conversation 60 years later.
Wow.
And especially when it came to invisible stigmatized identities, right? About sexual orientation, I'm like, we're still asking those same questions. And why, right? Because up until maybe 10, 15 years ago, you really didn't talk about it, right? And
Right.
so now's the time, like if I'm in a position to ask questions and hopefully, help others. And, I believe in my very, very just heart of hearts, right? If that we can help each other, then that is when we become better as a society.
For
And
sure.
so I look, I explore, and I want to understand, right? Why do people feel the way that they do? And how can we help each other? And so I think that that's what inspires me every day for what I do.
Mhm. No, I love that, and I know it's probably research isn't easy. PhD is not easy, but it's got to be a little bit easier for you because you have such a passion for what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you want to help future generations because like you were just talking about, you were reading a paper that's having the same conversation 60 years ago, and we're going to be coming up on a century ago still having the same conversations without which I think we're and I please correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's steps being taken in the correct direction,
Oh yeah.
but okay.
Yeah. I, make no, let me be very, very clear about this, right? Incredible steps have been taken, right?
Mhm.
But there's always opportunity to advance, right? So
Of course.
here we look at it and say, take it out of context of the DEI space for a moment, but
Mhm.
our understanding of management styles, right, and leadership theory has evolved over. We've studied it. There's actually text about this all the way back to the Greek and Roman era. I mean, there are
Wow.
publications out of this.
Wow.
So they have ancient scrolls that talk about this, right? Different leadership styles. And we continually evolve. And that is in part by science, our ability to communicate with each other. If you think about 20 years ago, this podcast would not be possible. The
True.
technology didn't exist. So
Right.
now we have the tools that give us the opportunity to ask more in-depth questions. So we take the work that has been done and we build on it. So it's not like we're starting with a blank slate. We're just enhancing our understanding. Think
Mhm.
about genetic testing, biomedical engineering. I mean,
Yep.
fields change. It's not that it started at zero in year 2023. No, we build on it, right? I
Mhm.
mean, that's just um so we progress through it. And so for me, I think that's just a natural progression in life.
Mhm.
And so I say I the book in 1963, but our incredible we have some amazing work that some faculty that are absolutely incredible. And I can go down a road any day talking about this at any time because it is something that I absolutely love. And so we acknowledge that where we have been and where we currently are, but also where we're going. And this is when I
Mhm.
say I quote I have it right up in front of my desk that says, "You learn from the past, you live in the present, but you plan for the future."
Mhm.
And so you have to know where you've been to see where you are, but you also have to plan for the future. And that is hopefully where we are all going to a
I
bright
love it.
future.
I sure hope so. I definitely hope so. Um, and I think we could take that conversation down a million roads, but for the sake of for the sake of this podcast, we're gonna reel it back into DEI.
Right. Bring it on.
Um,
Bring it on.
no, of course. Um, and we were talking about the history of thing things like and history being like even the 1962 paper you were talking about.
Yeah.
And my wife actually had a question that I want to bring up and for you,
Uh-oh.
and that's and it's kind of how do you respond to the belief that DEI is only for like historically marginalized groups and believe that it doesn't apply to them?
Ooh. That's a great question. That sounds like a question I'm gonna steal that and put it in a paper for my students to answer and see what comes out of it.
Do
Um,
it.
you know what? I, I think hmm, I'm gonna answer that in actually two parts, right?
Of course. Take it
Is
wherever you want.
one it goes back to something that we were talking about a little bit earlier, is that everybody comes with and from different experiences.
Mhm.
So you have to respect that, right? And I
Right.
think in the second part of that is the power of DEI is not about talking, but about listening and
Okay.
hearing what other people are saying, right? So I look at it and go, I have my experiences, but tell me about yours, right? And whether that be good, bad, or indifferent, tell me why you feel the way that you do.
Mhm.
Because when you listen and you hear other people's voices, that is what is at the heart of DEI, right? And so we can say that people are talking, but what about communicating? Because those are two different terms, right?
Absolutely.
Is if you can talk and put words out there, but are people hearing you? Are people actually listening? And are people actually processing the information that is being conveyed? And
Mhm.
so I think part of that process is how do we actually share and have a common respect so that we can hear each other. And
Yeah.
so I think that's probably at the heart of it is no one no one person has the absolute answer. And I think we have to have humility, respect, and an awareness that we're all different, and that is actually awesome, right?
Yeah.
When we recognize that we're all different and we all have our powers and strengths both inside and outside, that is the best part of life. And so if we can find a way to harness all of that power, we're not no one will be able to stop truly the advancements that we come up with.
No, I love it, and I don't remember at all where I heard this quote, but it when you were talking about it, and it reminded me of, like, "You may be listening, but are you hearing?" And that's so true, and I think that's the other half of the equation that doesn't get talked about or at least identified, because I hear all the time about how we need to have a conversation or we've lost the ability to have a civil conversation or whatever it might be. But I think the other half of that is that it's not that we aren't having the conversation, but we're not hearing each other. And I think that's a huge, huge part that people are missing, and I think you hit the nail on the head talking about it.
Yeah, I think it just boils down to a respect, right? And
100%.
respect in life.
Mhm.
And so you just have to, for me, right? I always say, help me. My go-to phrase is help me understand how you feel, right?
Mm.
And I'm going to sit here, I'm not going to talk, I'm going to listen to you and let you tell me your story.
Love it. No, I love that, and I don't have anything to add. I love that, and I think that we should all have that mindset going into conversations and when we meet new people, because I think it would generate a much more pleasant society for everyone. And it's not realistic, but if we go in with that kind of open mind, I think it would be very, very beneficial.
I'm gonna, as a friend of
Yeah.
6 years, push back. I don't think I'm gonna maybe. I hope you're wrong.
Mhm.
That I believe it is attainable.
I love
Um,
that.
and I believe right in the goodness of people, and I believe that we all possess the ability to care for each other,
Mhm.
to respect each other, And I do believe that that equilibrium is there.
Mhm.
There's more that brings us together than divides us. And
For
I
sure.
do believe that in my heart of hearts and my soul of souls. And I tell all of my friends, family, and people that I don't know is truly there is more that unites us than divides us. And so it is easy sometimes to not see that, but I strongly believe that there's a lot of good in the world.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And let me clarify what I meant by attainable or achievable. And what I meant was being able to sit down with every person that I meet and have that conversation.
Oh
I
yeah,
think I 100% think that taking the mindset that we're talking about into every interaction is achievable.
I
It may
agree.
not be achievable for everybody 100% of the time because we all have our moods,
Oh
but having
yeah.
but I think having the respect for people that we keep talking about is 100% achievable.
Oh,
Absolutely.
absolutely. And I would 100% agree with you. I will not be able to speak with everyone in the world. I promise you.
Mhm.
Like that's
And
just
I
not
wish I could. I love hearing stories.
so do I, but as much as I have traveled the world, I don't think I'm going to meet the world population.
There's a lot of people.
There are.
Um, but I do wanna kinda ask, coming back to kinda your background and what you're working on, like,
Yeah,
talk about the benefits of having a diverse, equitable, inclusive, classroom and corporate America for those that are in the working force.
sure. So there's a great piece that was published a few years ago that really talks about how people want to be seen for who they are and have a voice in the workplace, right?
Mhm,
Um, and so and I think that really kind of embodies my work, right? So for me, what I talk about is my job is I go into everything with an open mind. And I don't go in saying, I'm looking for this answer, right? I let the information speak to me and what the results show. But what I also show, right, is what I look at is it's an opportunity to give voice to people, kind of in circumstances that may not have been able to have a voice or don't feel comfortable sharing. But through
mhm,
answering a survey, maybe about some uncomfortable topics, right? Like one
right,
of the questions that I ask is about workplace ostracism, right? Do you feel like you're being excluded from work and why, right? And so these are anonymous and confidential surveys that are answered and people share. And so I'm able to give voice, even though I have no idea who the respondents are, right? I have
mhm,
no way of telling, but these are real people telling their story by trusting that their answers are going to have an opportunity to be shared, right? And
yeah,
so I take that responsibility incredibly, incredibly seriously, where I go, I'm kind of a conduit to tell people's story. And
for
so
sure.
that's what I do through DEI research and serve as kind of this pipeline to share people's stories and experiences. And then as far as the workplace, right? So for people who say, okay, Michael, you've talked a really good game about DEI and woohoo, right? What does that mean? But if you think about the outcomes that are associated with equity and inclusion in the workplace, we know and we've shown there is a huge body of literature that shows that when you employ a more diverse workforce, work productivity, job performance, and organizational commitment are astronomically increased. Then you have lower turnover rates. So we then right there benchmark that and say, okay, if we know this, right, then
Mhm.
what are the factors that influence that? So how do we keep this diverse population? Okay,
Mhm.
that's kind of that equity and inclusion part, right? Do people have equal access to the resources? But also, do people have equal access to share their experiences? Well, that's the inclusion part, right? And then we are starting to show, and there's publications out there that talk about this. When people perceive that they have a voice, that their opinion matters, right? And if you follow kind of this common sense, if people think that they're part of the team, well, guess what? They're going to be more committed to the organization.
Mhm.
And once they're more committed to the organization, productivity goes up, performance goes up, and employee morale goes up. Because one of the most toxic things in the workplace, right, is a kind of a poor work environment. If I see all of my coworkers are leaving within 3 months, 6 months, or a year, what does that say,
Mhm.
right? What does that
Yeah.
mean? Well, then guess what? Morale starts to come down, more people leave, and then you can see
Mhm.
it's kind of it's the ripples in the pond. It spreads
Mhm.
out and it spreads like wildfire, and it's hard to recover from that.
For sure, and that reminds me of a study that I saw, or statistic, not even a study that I saw, of employee turnover, and I think if I remember correctly, financial reasons for leaving a job was, like, number 8.
Yep,
Like, it was much lower on the list than I was expecting. So it being that inclusion part of it and feeling like you have a voice, I'm 99% sure that was, like, number 1, like, they didn't
it is.
feel
It is.
included. You would know.
It is. Well, so we actually, in my human resource management class that I've taught last semester, is I always put up this bar chart, and I ask students in the class, I'm like, what motivates you every single day when you go to work, right?
Mhm,
What are some things that motivate you? And we've talked about, and this is actually before we talk about the chapter, right? And so I asked them, and well, they'll talk about having friends at work, a knowledgeable boss, promotion opportunities, growth opportunities, training opportunities. And then, in this conversation, I throw that one question out there without any prompting. And then I make a list and I put everything up on the whiteboard and I go, does anyone see something missing from here? And they
mhm,
go, money. And I'm like, and then I click on the slide and money, financial, you need, people want to make money. But if you think
mhm.
about it, right, that's when we talk about motivation, that is a very short term motivational factor.
Yeah.
Because if you can make a ton of money very quickly, right? And maybe you do as a consultant. But if you're looking to make an investment, because you're investing your time, you're spending 40, 50 hours a week. If you think about, if you actually put the time that you respond to emails in commuting time, it's higher than 40 hours a week, right? That we
Mhm,
work for organizations. And then full time. And then what you do is go, oh, do I love what I do? Like, and do I have a good friend at work? Do I trust my colleagues? Do I think that they have my back? And
mhm.
if those things aren't there, right? And that's very broad, but that's,
Yeah.
if I see, like, are some people being excluded? Like, don't I why aren't people like, why do some opinions not matter? Then
Mhm.
that starts to kind of corrupt and wear away at the organization, and that can be really very damaging.
No, 100%. 100% agree, and I don't have anything, like, to add, but it prompted the question in my head. of
Bring it on.
like where do you see this like DEI and this focus in not just corporate America, but in life? Like, where do you see it going? Like in the next 5 years? Well, we won't go like full on like when we're long gone type conversation, but like in the next 5 years, where do you see this heading?
More questions. And I say that lighthearted, but I
Mhm.
actually I actually genuinely mean that, right?
Okay.
Of I hope my line of work and this conversation, even if I always say, right, if one person has heard this and it makes a difference in just one person's life, and they go out and pose a question to somebody else, then we've made a difference, right?
Yeah.
So I think part of the job where DEI is going, it's going to evolve, right?
Mhm.
Conversations are still going to take place 5 years, 10 years, 100 years from now. And I just hope for me to be part of that conversation. And for my short time here on this earth, I hope to be part of it and
Mhm.
contribute to it. And I really think you see a lot of companies recognizing the value of it.
Yes.
And I think in the short term, right, what we've seen is it has to be authentic. The
Mhm.
the actual care and buy-in, because we are as human beings incredibly smart, and we can see that if it's not genuine, if it's not authentic, we're going to see it and we're going
Right.
to figure it out.
Right.
And then that's more damaging if it comes back that it your attempt was just superficial.
Mhm.
That can be incredibly damaging.
For sure, and I mean, you previously hit on the benefits of the way of thinking and having the conversation from a corporate America side, and it obviously has turned over into the relationships in your life. But speaking just to the business side of it, the importance of the way of thinking and trying to implement more DEI efforts. It's more than just hiring different races.
Yeah,
It's the ways of life, the backgrounds of people, and like you were talking about earlier, it increases productivity, increases morale, it increases the likelihood that people are stay so tenure or whatever the right word is. It's
right,
truly amazing and stuff that I mean, going into this conversation, I did not know that. Like
right,
I could have guessed that,
right,
but I didn't know.
right, right. And that's part of a lot of things that we talk about, right? This is just another conversation, and this will
Mhm.
lead to another conversation
I hope it
that
does.
will, kind of take this downhill roll of where does it stop? I don't know, right? And I think
Mhm.
part of the conversation is acknowledging that, of saying I am not um the person who has all the answers. And I always joke, but I am a very strong believer in this, that anyone that says they have all of the answers is just darn wrong. Because no
Yes.
one has all of the answers.
Yes.
um and I could pull a Big Bang Theory quote out of
Do
like
it. Do it. I
um
love Big Bang Theory.
it is one of my, like, I love it. um but even then, there are things that, we all have our areas of expertise, but no one knows everything, right? And you
Mhm.
can't. It's just not possible. But so it's learning and seeing where things go, and that is just
Mhm.
so awesome, like, so cool.
Yes. No, I love that, and it's actually really funny. It's why we're a reason why we're actually really good friends. To, I mean, if you think about it from the outside, you and I are two couldn't be from two more completely opposite places and paths, and somehow ended up in the same place, and our paths intertwined, and now we've been really good friends for
Yeah.
6 years
Yeah.
and will be the rest of our lives. But it just I don't know where that tangent came from. All I was gonna say was you mentioned Big Bang Theory, and when you mentioned no one knows everything, all of it took everything in me to not to say, well, not even Sheldon Cooper knows everything.
I was going to say that, but I didn't want to say it.
And I had no idea you even liked Big Bang Theory.
I
So,
love Big Bang Theory.
oh, we watch it now. Um, but we're getting to the end of our episode,
Yeah.
and something I want to ask you is like, if there was one thing, and take this wherever you want to take it, but what do you wish people would understand about DEI?
Ooh. Oh, you're asking some really good, like really, really good questions.
I wish I
Um,
could take credit for it. Thank my wife.
so and that was not the question I thought you were going to ask. So this one's catching me a little bit off guard.
Well,
Um,
answer the one that you thought I was going to and bring it back around.
no, so what I'm going to say what I hope for DEI for myself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think this actually applies broadly to your question is the purpose of what I hope people kind of take away from is that it's an opportunity to open the door for conversations for people to express themselves. And that is in part just the ability to recognize that we are all different. And that is the beauty in the world. And so we, lower, kind of take off the blinders for a moment and not tunnel vision, but see the peripheral in the world.
Mhm.
And if we can do that, then it's going to be a pretty awesome, my hope. And I think that's where it's going. So I'm going to leave it there and I'm going to think about it some more and have a better answer for you later.
We're gonna have to do an episode 2, especially when your work gets published. That may be an episode 3 because I think there's so many conversations that can come from what even the little bit that we've talked about, and I say little bit, we've talked about a lot. And but it's such like we're scratching the surface, I feel like, to of where we could take this.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Oh,
but
yeah.
I mean, I gotta know what question you thought I was gonna ask, and then I'm gonna
Uh,
make you answer it, so be ready for that.
it's an easy question to answer. So, honestly, I thought the question you were going to ask me is if you had one piece of advice for the younger version of yourself, what would it be and why?
Hey, Michael, if you had one piece of advice that for your younger self, what would it be and why?
So this is why I said the helpful huddle, all right?
Uh-huh.
Because it's have faith in yourself. Um, because believe in yourself that you are capable of doing whatever you want to do, and it is achievable.
Mhm.
And so my advice to myself and my advice to others is don't be afraid to take that leap of faith. And the person that needs to believe in you the most is looking at you in the mirror every morning when you wake up, because that's where it starts, is right there in the mirror saying, I've got this. But also don't be afraid to say, I don't know things. Like I still go to my advisors and say, can you help me? Like, I don't know. And that's okay, because nobody knows, as Sheldon Cooper would say, no one knows everything. And so have faith in yourself and believe that you can do it. And if you don't have the answers, that is why we learn, is because you don't,
Sure.
no one has the answers. So we learn and you explore and have fun and have faith in yourself and never be afraid to take a risk.
Love that. All right, Michael. So for our last question, I
Absolutely.
always I always like to kind of leave it with with this. Like, so what would you suggest for our this is gonna be a multi-part question, by the way.
Oh,
What would you suggest for our audience, like if they want to learn more about the DEI efforts, where can they learn that? And then to continue my question, like if they want to continue this conversation, is there a way that they can reach out to you, or is there a platform that they can
sure.
get in contact with?
Sure. So there are not many Michael Caligiuris in the world. So I'll tackle the latter part first.
Perfect.
Anyone can find me on LinkedIn and
Great.
connect with me via that platform. That is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. If you Google or just LinkedIn search my name, it comes right up. So that is the way.
And
And
I'll
I'm
link that in the description for the video, and it'll also be below you for anyone that watches on YouTube. I think you should make your classes watch it.
um, and so for me, I think that's one.
Mhm.
And the other platform is look at you, I platforms to look at. There's actually a lot of Department of Labor and the labor statistics. You can start informing yourself depending on your personality, right? Of what you want to see. Are you a numbers person? You can look at the Department of Labor and you can see legitimate numbers. But you can also go, and everybody knows Google, but what people also don't know, and I know you know this, Luke, from your master's program, Google has another arm of it called Google Scholar. And type in simply diversity in the workplace. And there are some incredible articles. And you can see them, like there are publications called the Academy of Management Journal, the Journal of Applied Psychology. There are some major publications publishing or um, sorry, of that really speak to that. And so you can look at those mainstream articles and just read, and they give a really great overview. And if any of the listeners want to reach out via LinkedIn and ask me about, can you send me the name of that article? I'm happy to share that as well.
Perfect. No, I love that, and thank you for being open to speaking with any listeners that may want to get in contact with you about it.
Of course.
Um, but Michael, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on the podcast and sharing your knowledge with me, anybody that's listening. It's truly been a very educational process for me this entire hour that we've been talking, and the work you're doing is so important, and I know you know that, but you also need to hear that what you're doing is very important.
Well, thank you. And thank you. And I appreciate, and, you are one of my closest friends. So anything, anytime.
Perfect. So, Michael, again, thank you. We're gonna say bye to the people now. So throw up a deuce sign or wave,
Yes.
whatever you want to do.
If any of my friends see that, they will laugh hysterically with that because that is so outside my realm.
I am posting it. You know I can screenshot
Of
that.
course I do.
But Michael, once again, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to episode 10 of the Helpful Huddle podcast, where we interviewed Michael Caligiuri on the different subjects surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Remember to give us a like and a follow on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter with the user handle at helpful_huddle and the YouTube channel at Helpful Huddle Podcast. You are also able to listen to us on both Spotify and Apple Podcast. The links are also found in the description below. Please reach out with your questions on topics that you would like to learn about in the future.